Thank you so much, Heidi, for reading the word for us. Thank you, worship team, for leading us during a time of musical response and worship and singing. But I do need to present before you an alternative party. You have Pastor Rene, who is running for president of the world, and his platform that he is running upon is a moderate one. He says, let's reform daylight savings time to make it for a Friday afternoon at 3. He's a moderate in a part of the Reformation Party. I'm a party for the world, the world freedom from daylight savings time. I am a revolutionary. So I am the abolitionist party, where we are going to abolish daylight savings time in its entirety. Are you with me? Some of you are like, I thought this wasn't a political church. It is a joy and privilege to open up the Word with you this morning. My name is Karl. I'm the senior pastor around these parts. And if you brought your Bible, please open with me to the passage that was just read, Genesis chapter 3. We are going to be beginning in verses 14 and working through verse 19. If you've been around over the course of the last few months, we have started and continued our series through the book of Genesis that has confronted us with some big questions. Some questions along the lines of, who do you belong to? Who is your community? Questions that are bigger in nature, like what is your purpose in life? What were you designed for, and what were you made for? The last 2 weeks, or the last 2 messages in the gospel, or in the book of Genesis, were a little heavier. We've asked some heavier questions, like, what are you ashamed of? What are you ashamed of? And then last week, we asked another heavier question of, from whom are you hiding? From whom would you just rather not see? And we saw from the book of Genesis, the book of beginnings, where some answers can be found to some of these bigger, heavier questions of our existence. And today we're going to continue with the big questions. It's not quite as heavy, but it is, but it's certainly not light. And the question for us this morning to begin is, what is wrong with us? Like a Midwestern mom who caught their kids up way too late after their bedtime. Boy, what is wrong with you? And we're going to ask ourselves that question as we unpack Genesis chapter 3, verses 14 through 19. Why do bad things happen with such regularity? Why do marriages end in divorce? Why is racism a thing? Why do wars continue to break out all over the world? Why do people murder and rape and commit acts of terrorism? Why can't my Chicago Bears ever develop a franchise quarterback? The answer to these big why questions are covered in today's passage before us. And it stems from the answers to the question, what is wrong with us? As we explore the text of Genesis chapter 3, we are going to unpack this big idea. The big idea of the message is this: sin has corrupted the entire world. Sin has corrupted the entire world. Because of that, we should seek a Savior who has overcome the world. Our message unpacks for us in 3 scenes that display to us the consequences of our sin. First, it shows us the slithering serpent. Then it shows us the strain of the woman. And then it shows us the sweat of the man. And as it unfolds, these 3 scenes, we will unpack the big idea of the message this morning. That we should see and seek a Savior who has overcome the world. When I was 5 years old, I believe it was after kindergarten going into first grade. We lived in a townhome subdivision in Illinois, in which it was a nice subdivision with a nice townhome, but across from us there was an empty lot that was completely undeveloped at the time. And it was very similar to the empty lot that we have on our facility to the east of us here. But in that empty lot, a neighborhood kid and I decided one afternoon, you know what, we're going to go into that lot, and we are going to look for snakes. We lived in Illinois, so there weren't any poisonous or venomous snakes, so we weren't scared of them. But if you go into this empty lot that was full of construction debris, you could lift up boards and the gardener snakes would slither away from you. And being the 5 and 6-year-old adventurous boys that we were, we would want to lift up the plywood or the boards and then catch the snakes, because it was fun to be a snake catcher as a 5, 6-year-old. The neighborhood boy and I were in this empty lot, and there was a large piece of plywood, one that was so heavy that either one of us alone would not have been able to lift it up. But we were fairly confident that underneath that plywood is going to be the treasure trove of gardener snakes. So he got on one side, I got on the other. We began to lift up this heavy piece of plywood for our 5 and 6-year-old bodies. As I lifted it up and he lifted it up, it became too heavy for him. He dropped his side. I was left holding it by myself, which I did not have enough strength. I fell backwards, dropped the plywood, and a nail went directly into my knee. I walked home 5 or 6 years old to my house, blood running down my leg, and to this day I still have the scars for the consequences of doing my best impression of Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn. There are consequences for our actions. When was the first time that you had realized that there were consequences for the things that you had done? At this point in Genesis chapter 3, the man and the woman have sinned. The serpent deceived the woman into eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Then the man took fruit from the woman and ate it while he was with her. Immediately, both the man and the woman felt deep, deep shame. The man was pursued by God. God asks him a question, "Where are you, and what is this that you have done?" The man blames the woman blames the serpent, and no one takes responsibility for their actions or for what that was done. And now, in our passage this morning, God is going to give the consequences for the action. Now, why would God need to give consequences for the actions of the serpent, the man, or the woman and the man? Why doesn't God just say to the man and to the woman and to the serpent, "Hey, you know, it's just one slip up, no biggie, continue to eat, drink, and be merry. Have fun, don't do it again, you silly little sinners"? Why is it appropriate and right for God to respond to the sin of humanity and the serpent with consequences? Because if there are no consequences to the serpent, to the woman, and to the man, and they're permitted to continue to do as they please, everything in God's good creation would quickly and permanently be destroyed by them. Evil itself would multiply and thrive. Sin and destruction would overcome God's good earth instantaneously if there were no consequences for the sinfulness of the first man and the first woman and the serpent. So God places consequences on his creation for its sinfulness to make sure that evil would not spread perpetually, eternally, and forever upon his creation. So God gives the consequences in verse 14. The Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all the beasts of the field." In this passage, God pronounces a curse upon the serpent. A curse is a divine judgment. A curse is a judicial declaration of guilt for something that would be very difficult to prove in court, biblically speaking. To the modern person, something bad happening to a person, we might be tempted to say, oh, that's just unlucky, or it's an unfortunate set of circumstances that happened to you. A person in the ancient Near East, in which the context in which the scriptures were written, would say that thing is being cursed. A curse is placed upon the serpent for deceiving the woman. And the curse that is placed upon the serpent is the curse that is greater than the curse upon all the rest of the animals. The naivety and the innocence of the other livestock and the other beasts are contrasted with the curse that is upon the serpent for its sinful craftiness. The serpent, he knew what he was doing. And now, because he acted upon his sinfulness, the serpent, is now cursed above all the rest of God's created beings outside of humanity. Well, what does this curse look like? And the verse 14 continues. The serpent is confined to the ground, slithering on his belly for the totality of his life. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. Now, most of us who have taken freshman level biology know that snakes don't eat dust. The pronouncement of the curse on the serpent is to set apart the snake from the rest of the animals and to isolate the snake. The snake is a physical manifestation of the isolation, loneliness, and futility that sin produces. Do you want to know what evil looks like? Do you want to know what evil produces in creation? Just look at the isolated, wily, slithering serpent. It's lonely and selfish is a picture of what evil looks like. By and large, the overwhelming majority of snake species act entirely alone. They hunt alone. They slither in the dark alone. They don't want to be noticed. And they are entirely predatory. They feast upon the other animals. But the most vivid picture of the snake's wiles is the serpent's hostility towards humanity. Verse 15, I will put enmity between you and the woman. The serpent will slither away from and against the good purposes of the mother of all of humanity. There will be hostility, not peace, with the most cursed animal of creation and our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. And the struggle will continue from one generation to the next between your offspring and her offspring. But the hostility that will be seen is not just in avoidance. The hostility won't mean the snakes are going to do their thing, serpents are going to do their thing, and humanity is going to do our thing, and there's going to be hostility that's ultimately going to lead to an ending separation. But the hostility from one generation to the next is not seen in separation from one another. The hostility will manifest itself in violence. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. The ESV translation does an adequate job of translating the Hebrew term as bruise because it remains consistent in both lines. But the head of the serpent is contrasted with the heel of the offspring of the woman. The action of the serpent and the action of the offspring of the woman are the same, as the ESV translates, bruise, which means they're violent towards each other. The offspring of the woman causes a bruise to the serpent's head. The serpent causes a bruise to the offspring's heel. This is why I choose to elect to use the term strike at rather than bruise. The repetition of the same word highlights the importance of the violent hostility that exists between the serpent and the offspring of the woman. This is war. The most cursed of all of the created order has now declared war against humanity. Our death as humanity is the serpent's delight. The serpent enjoys the destruction, death, chaos, and despair of humanity. Lurking in the shadow, seeking to strike at unexpected heels of humanity, humanity is no longer safe from the slithering spiritual intruder who seeks their utter and total destruction. The serpent and his offspring have slithered through the cosmos to deceptively destroy the entirety of the human race. There's no peace between the serpent and the offspring of the woman, only war. Now, many of you here in this room are World War II buffs, so you probably know more about the subject than I, but World War II was supposed to be the war that ends all wars. When the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs against the Japanese Empire and to end World War II, the utter devastation of unleashing the power of atomic energy against humanity was supposed to declare an end to nuclear weapons manufacturing. That was the idea at the time. We just drop these 2 bombs, everybody's going to see how destructive these weapons are, and no one is ever going to want to use them again. And the whole world will work towards peace. That was the idea. That's not what happened, is it? In the years following World War II, rather than dismantle nuclear weapons, what did the USA and the Soviet Union, or the former Soviet Union, do? We went into a Cold War, did we not? Aggressively increasing the nuclear weapons to stockpile the most in the world. And even developing a bomb that is 1,000 times more devastating than the atomic bomb, the hydrogen bomb. And even the current skirmish that we're seeing in Ukraine now, we see that the Cold War never really ended, did it? As the threat of nuclear war is now rekindled. The hostility between the cursed serpent and humanity, it reveals to us that this world is run by evil. The peace and the prosperity that humanity was designed for is constantly being disrupted by the slithering serpent who pokes his head out of the grass, strikes the heels of humanity, and then gets humanity to blame one another as they go to war. The more chaos, the more destruction that the world experiences, the more delighted the offspring of the serpent becomes. But the striking of the heel of humanity is not the final word for the serpent. The offspring of the woman will strike the serpent's head. Maybe there is hope for the hostility to end in humanity, between humanity and the serpent. Maybe there is an offspring of the woman who will decisively strike the head of the serpent and win the war for good. Maybe humanity can resist the slithering strikes of the serpent and his offspring. But brothers and sisters, It starts with realizing that there is a slithering serpent. Realizing that there is an enemy that delights in the destruction of every single person in this room, who wants nothing more than chaos, despair, evil, and destruction for you and everything that you love. Maybe there might be hope for humanity if we can share the conviction that we have a common enemy. But the reality that we're in a spiritual war isn't the only consequence of humanity's sin. The hostility between the serpent and humanity was a dramatic consequence of human sin that has affected every person who has ever lived. But the next consequence of human sin is directed towards the woman and will affect the totality of humanity as well. Do you remember in chapter 1 of Genesis that we worked through many months ago, when God made the man and the woman in his image, what did he do after he created them? What did he do? He blessed them. He blessed them, and he blessed them verbally with giving them a command. He said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth with my image as you multiply and flourish in humanity. God's design for the human flourishing of humanity is multiplication. God's desire for humanity to rule over his creation and represent him well is seen through the multiplication of human beings like you and me. But sin has ruined the capacity for the man and the woman to rule creation as the image of God honorably. They're now corrupted to do things for themselves, to live selfishly rather than selflessly, to fuel hatred and war rather than harmony and peace, to promote sexual exploitation and human trafficking rather than marriage, family, and blessing from one generation to the next, to abuse our God-given talents rather than live honorably under a God-given vocation. And this means there must be some consequence placed upon human multiplication. If multiplying humans is easy and pain-free, evil men are going to exploit women as baby factories. Let me give you an example. Could you imagine Hitler, his desire to conquer the entire world? Could you imagine his army being supplied and fueled with an endless army of his own sons produced at free cost with as many women as he desired? It would be an absolute nightmare. So the consequence of human sin limits multiplication through pain and childbearing. Rather than multiply as many children as a woman desires without pain, now childbearing comes through the deep cost of the multiplication of pain. Verse 16. God says, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain, you will bring forth children. Do you notice which word is repeated in the same verse? There's two of them, childbearing/children and pain. God is associating these things and highlighting the importance that children are going to bring about pain. And all the parents say, amen. God places a boundary around unhindered multiplication. The woman can only produce children through the straining of 9 months of intense labor. Parents.com posted an article recently titled, 22 Women Share the Joys of Being a Mom. There were a number of joys that the women shared about motherhood, things that you might expect, like teaching children important lessons, bonding with their children, having fun together as a family. But one woman in the article said something that stood out to me, jumped off the screen as I was reading it. She said this, when I was 33, I had my first child. So I know I had a life before children, but I can't remember what it was like. Having my children was such a life-altering experience. I always was looking for purpose in my life, and when I had my children, I found it. I love being a mother. I know I'm good at it. That doesn't mean I don't make my share of mistakes. Every day, I add money to one of my 3 children's money for therapy for all the things I did to screw you up account. But I'm a better person for knowing my children, and I am very honored to be their mother. And I wouldn't trade my best days before kids for my worst days with kids. This woman testifies, motherhood brought purpose to her life. But the consequences of sin, that's even said humorously in this mother's testimony, is that the purpose for which women are created, to cultivate community, to multiply God's image, to help humanity have a sense of belonging with one another. The fundamental experience of bringing forth children is no longer pain-free. And it is in the woman's straining in childbearing that humanity must now is forced to flourish. If there's a consequence on childbearing and motherhood, well, then maybe relief can be found in her marriage. If childbearing is a strain, a purposeful strain at that, but if it's a strain, perhaps her marriage will be a safe haven of freedom and joy without pain in her marriage relationship. God's consequences to the woman, however, are not limited to childbearing. They persist in the marriage relationship as well. God says at the end of verse 16, your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Now, this is a very tricky verse to understand. What is the woman's desire for her husband? I think in this context, it's difficult to comprehend because there's not anything tangible to grab onto. So that's why we should probably go to the nearest use of the same verb, desire, in Genesis chapter 4, verse 7. God is responding to Cain's anger in Genesis chapter 4, verse 7. And God says to Cain, if you do well, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Sin's desire is for you, but you must rule over it. The desire of sin is to rule over Cain. If Cain were to allow his anger to go unrestrained, his sin would rule him. Conversely, he needs to rule over his anger so that sin doesn't dominate him. And if we bring this understanding of a clear descriptive language of Genesis chapter 4, verse 7, to interpret Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, we can understand what God is saying to the woman. Your unrestrained desire will be to rule over your husband, to control your husband. Through games, manipulation, emotional tactics, lies, the withholding of sex, the enticement of sexual pleasure, if you let your desire for your husband to go unrestrained, you will make every effort to control him. Conversely, his unrestrained response to your manipulative tactics, his unrestrained response is going to be a tyrannical rule. He will use his strength, his brute force, his domination, his anger, and his fear tactics to scare you into submission. The consequences of sin for the marriage relationship is a perpetual power struggle. The woman being a manipulative deceiver when left to herself, and the man being a brutalizing tyrant when left to himself. The following scenario is fictional. Any likeness to any couple in this room is entirely fictional and coincidental. So don't think I'm pointing you out. And the reason I use Bob and Penny is because the premarital counseling book, fictional characters that we use, their names are Bob and Penny on their fictional, So if your name is Bob and or Penny here, you can blame preparing for marriage course that we do. Bob and Penny were married in their mid-20s. They didn't have any children. They both wanted to start a family soon. Penny miscarried 3 times. Bob, after the 3rd miscarriage, said, I want to be done. I want to stop trying to have children. Penny persisted, and they kept trying. After the 4th miscarriage, Bob told Penny that he was done trying to have a family. In response, Penny withdrew sexually from Bob, making excuses to every single one of his advances. Eventually, Bob stopped making advances. Bob began looking at pornography. Penny withdrew emotionally even more, satisfied her social needs through friends at work, rarely opened herself up to meaningful emotional connection with Bob. Sexually isolated, Bob pursued an emotionally attentive woman in his office. Penny found out, filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery, married a man from her office a year later, and had 4 children with him. In this situation between Bob and Penny, whose fault is it? Was Bob at fault for throwing in the towel to have children? Not understanding the desire of his wife? Was it his fault because of his infidelity and adultery? Was Penny to blame in her persistent desire to control her husband and force him to have children with her, even after 4 miscarriages? Genesis chapter 3, verse 16 tells us that the desire of the woman unrestrained is a manipulative seductress who's able to leverage her resources to control her husband when it goes unchecked. It also tells us that in the heart of every man is the lust for domination and brutalization to become a tyrant when left to himself, that leverages his strength and his force to subject his wife to his desires. The hard truth of Genesis chapter 3, verse 16 is played out in childbirth and marriage again and again from one generation to the next since the beginning. And it's the strain of the woman that affects every single person today. Rather than rule over creation with selfless joy in the glory of God, we are now selfish tyrants who desire to rule ourselves. So what does this mean for us? Well, first, I think the first thing it means for us, we should acknowledge that raising a family is going to be painful. Families, yes, are a blessing from the Lord, but families are forged in 9 months of motherhood suffering and pregnancy. And that is a preparation for a lifelong of emotional and even at times physical suffering that it takes to raise children in a fallen and evil world that push against the stain and consequences of sin. We should acknowledge raising a family is going to be painful. It's going to be difficult. Secondly, we should accept that marriage and relationships, they're gonna take a ton of work. A ton of work. They're gonna demand your entire life. The work of marriage doesn't start with identifying the sin in your spouse. That's self-evident, it's very easy to point out. The work of marriage starts in identifying the sin in yourself, in myself. A good marriage starts with the commitment that states, we will give ourselves to a regular lifestyle of confession and forgiveness. We will give ourselves to a regular lifestyle of confession and forgiveness, because left to myself, I am a manipulative seductress. Left to myself, I am a brutalizing tyrant. And therefore, I need to continue to give myself to a regular lifestyle of confession and forgiveness. What's wrong with my marriage is what's wrong with me. Then it moves to the other person. It doesn't start with the other person and then move to me. And if you can't figure out the two of those things, get help. Walk alongside of somebody who can help you identify these things. In marriage and family, the woman strains. This is a consequence of sin. But in the workplace and in our calling as humanity to subdue the earth and rule over it, the man sweats. God has moved from addressing the serpent to the woman, and now he will finish with addressing the man. The man gets the most words of the three subjects because he has a lot to say to the man. God begins his address by the man by giving the reason why he is receiving these consequences. He gave the reason to the serpent. He didn't give any reason to the woman. And in verse 17, he says, and to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat it. Now don't think like God is blaming the woman in this. He's blaming the man for not being able to discern the serpent's lies. The serpent lied, the woman listened to the serpent, and the man listened to the woman. This shows the reversal of the created order that God has designed. The way that God made things, God made the animals to listen to the man, and God made the woman to help the man order creation and rule over it, and made man to listen to God. Because the man submitted himself to the reversal of the created order now will no longer listen to the man. Notice what he says in verse 17. Cursed is the ground because of you. The ground will no longer be blessed, but cursed. The ground that you are to work and tend to, that provides blessing to you and to your family, is now subjected to futility. You can't find your eternal hope and destiny in your work in the land. And just as the woman will receive pain in childbearing, you're going to receive pain in your work. Verse 17 continues, in pain, same Hebrew word, in pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles shall bring forth from you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread. Translation to the man, your job will not be satisfying, and you're going to need to work harder to produce less. The passage concludes, and you are going to die till you return to the ground from out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Men, what this means for you, your job will never satisfy you fully. The earth cannot produce the satisfaction that your soul craves, regardless of how many hours you put in. You were built to work the ground. You were built to produce, to make good things. But the curse prevents us from ever being fully satisfied with the work of our hands. But the first man wasn't the only one who would need to sweat in his labor to produce something significant. I find it fascinating that the work of Christ on the cross was accomplished through wearing what? What was placed on his head as he was on the cross? A crown of thorns. Remember, right here in the text, through thorns and thistles, you shall produce, it shall bring forth for you. His brow didn't just sweat from his work of redemption. His brow bled from his work of redemption. And the mocking crowds, they're fueled by the slithering, deceptive lies of the serpent. Hail, the King of the Jews! And they struck him with their hands. The gospel, according to John, tells us. The woman who gave him birth, who agonized in childbirth to bring forth Jesus, she sat there and watched as her son was mocked by the lies of the slithering serpent, fueled by the hateful crowds. She sat there and watched, agonizing, as her son was being crucified, as her son was going to work on the cross. But it is in this work of this man that the redemption from the curse of sin, it is in this work in particular that the serpent's head is crushed. Now, you and me, brothers and sisters, we can find freedom in our toil, joy in our pain, through the death and the resurrection of the complete work of Christ on the cross. So if you are struggling in your marriage, if your family seems as if child rearing is nothing but pain, if you are laboring 40, 50, 60 hours a week to produce something that is not satisfying to your soul, Christ on the cross does not just say, I understand you. Christ on the cross says, I have taken that curse upon myself, and declares in one word in Greek, 3 words in English, it is finished. The serpent's head is struck finally and decisively, and 3 days later, he rose from the dead to produce a new recreated humanity in his own body, in his own flesh. So therefore, anyone who is in Christ, who trusts in that man who worked on the cross on your behalf, is no longer bound eternally to the cursed world of this earth, but is headed towards heaven forever in a recreated new heavens and new earth. Can I get an amen? Amen. We are going to celebrate the Lord's Supper here in just a moment. As the worship team comes forward and begins playing music, the Lord's Supper is a time for us to remember the work of Jesus on the cross. It's a time for us to remember all that he worked for, that he bled for, that he died for, to forgive you for your sin, and to give you meaning and even joy in the pain of your marriage, family, and vocation. So as the worship team is playing, and as you come forward to receive the elements, I want you thinking through the accomplished and finished work that the man, Jesus Christ, accomplished on your behalf to free you from the curse of this world, where there is no eternal meaning, where there is no eternal hope, but only pain and futility and destruction. And to rest assured that there is a man who has gone before you, who has fought the slithering serpent on your behalf, and invites you into an eternity with him in the new heavens and the new earth. If you are not a follower of Jesus, if you haven't placed your faith and your trust in him, at any point in your life, we invite you to just stay seated and not participate in the Lord's Supper this time, but reflect on all that has been said and declared and proclaimed, and we want you to think through what God might be asking and inviting you to lay down your sin and to embrace him by faith. And if you do make a profession of faith, if you say today here at Sierra Bible Church, on this Sunday in March, that I desire to be done with finding my hope, fulfillment, and life in the things of this world, and I desire to find it fully and completely in the finished work of Jesus Christ. I invite you to speak with me after the service, with one of our elder team who will be available to pray for you, or with another Christian that you know is here, and have them talk and pray with you for what it means to begin following Jesus potentially for the first time. I want to pray for us, and as I'm done praying, you can be invited up to participate in the elements in the Lord's Supper with us if you are a follower of Jesus. Heavenly Father, we thank you. We praise you for the finished, accomplished work of Christ on the cross. God, we thank you that the consequences of our sin did not prevent you from accomplishing the work necessary to redeem us from the curse, to turn the curse into a blessing. Help us, God, as we toil in marriage and in family and in our calling and our vocation and our work. God, as we toil in those areas, to remember that you, Lord Jesus, paid it all. And that you, by your Spirit at work now, can turn our pain into a joy, can turn our curse into a blessing. And help us, oh God, to be fueled to see that the hard work, marriage and family and vocation, does not permanently reside in finding our identity in any of those things, but permanently finds its resting place in the finished death and resurrection of your Son. So help us now, God, as we participate in this meal that you have instituted, to remember the body that you broke for us, the blood that you shed for us, to find joy and satisfaction and the understanding and the reality that you've taken the curse upon yourself with thorns on your head, to not just sweat from your brow, but to bleed from your brow, to accomplish for us what we couldn't accomplish for ourselves because of our sin. Thank you for giving us your grace. And we ask, God, that you would inspire us now to live the lives that you have called us to live, because we are free from sin and death through the cross of Jesus. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen.